Okay, so I'm going to start with a question. Who here has heard about the story of Troy?
Yeah.
Or seen the movie? Yeah. From those of you who heard about the story, who thinks the story of Troy is a true story? Because even if the story of Troy is not true, and it's probably not true, according to some researchers, Troy didn't even exist. But some of the story tells about all kinds of Greek gods that were involved in the story, and there is a good chance that it's not a true story. It's still a very important story. Why? Because it contains truths about us as people, about us as nation. It contains moral stories, and it's an important story that survived for thousands of years. Those truths are something that we see in every culture. In every culture we have those stories, we have cultural narratives, cultural heritage that talks about some of these stories from my culture, Israel, Jewish culture, which come from the Bible. As you all know, I don't look like that. I'm not a religious Jewish man. I consider myself Jewish, but I don't follow the rules of the Bible. But the same point that goes to the Troy story goes something new for me, because most of my life, Bible for me was something like all religion to be a little bit afraid of. Because I'm afraid, I admit, I'm a little afraid of religion, because I'm afraid of somebody who tells me what I have to do and how I have to think. And this is what I thought about the Bible, right? This is a book of rules that tells you you can do whatever you want, but you'll do what I tell you. It has a lot of stories about people like you and me, and it's true. God does come from time to time in the Bible. He is mentioned there a few times. But still, I think that if we read the Bible by saying to ourselves, what is the truth in the story, we can see that there are really great wisdoms in there. And I want to talk to you about, just give you a few examples. First chapter of the Bible, Genesis 1, is a chapter that talks about how God created the world. For those of you who are a little unfamiliar with the Bible says that God created the world in 7 days, actually 6, in the 7th he rested. And it talks about how he created earth and how he created the animals and the plants and everything. And some of you might know in the States there's a big big debate about that, if that should be taught in schools or if evolution should be taught in schools. But I look at that story and I say to myself, okay, I don't believe in God, right? But what does this story is trying to tell me? And I think that if you read it, the last thing that God created according to the story is us, right? Man, humankind. And I think that's a very, very nice story and a very nice moral, because we are the peak of creation. And I don't think people on a day-to-day basis treat each other like we are the peak of creation. Most of the time we don't treat each other very well. But it's more than that, because if you look at the verse, and you have the full verse in your handout that describes how God created us, it says this: He created us in our image, in His image and in His likeness. That means that we are like God. That means that we are all kind of a God, right? You and me and all of us here. And this is a wonderful, for me this is a wonderful concept. This is a very, very strong concept. And it's not only here, because even in the stories, when you read more into the Bible, this concept comes again. And one of the stories in the Bible that I want to tell you about is the story of Abraham. I don't know how many of you know it, but Abraham is considered the first Jewish man in the Bible. He was living somewhere around what is today Turkey, and God came to him and told him basically to do all kinds of stuff, and he promised him, I'm going to make you a great nation. And he basically asked him to do a lot of crazy stuff. He never argued. He never asked this question. If God would come to me, not likely, but he would come to me and would start telling me things, I would ask, why? Why should I do that? Or I would ask, other question, what is the meaning of life? Why do we have to study accounting? All kinds of things. but Abraham doesn't. He's the most obedient follower in all the Bible. Until one story suddenly speaks up. And he starts to argue with him. And he tells God, if there are 50 good people in those cities, would you still destroy them? And God says, you know what? For 50, if I find 50 good people there, maybe I don't destroy. And Abraham says, okay, what if there are 45? And he continues, what if there are 30? What if there are 20? What if there are 10? And I look at that, and I'm saying to myself, this is a religious text, right? It's supposed to tell us about God. Why is it telling us about a story of someone who is arguing with God? And this is the point where I go back to the beginning. If we are in the likeness of God, then we are God equals, then we can even argue with God. And I think what the Bible here is trying to tell us is, if you see something wrong, if your conscience, because if you are divine, if you are made like God, you have conscience and you have free will, if you see something wrong, you need to stand up for it. And if somebody tells you, I'm doing that in the name of God, that's not a good enough excuse, right? Because if you can argue with God himself, then saying I'm doing that in the name of God, that's not enough. And unfortunately, we see too much of that in the world, as I see today. But this story, you can argue if my interpretation is right or not, but I see it as right because a few chapters after that, we hear about a very important story in the Bible. It's called the binding of Isaac. Again, to make a very long story short, the Bible actually says that God decided to test Abraham. And he told him, take your son, Isaac, take him to the highest mountain in the area, bind him up, and kill him, sacrifice him for me. And Abraham, the obedient follower, says, alrighty then, and takes his son, ties him up, and he's with the knife, as you can see, this is a picture of it, and he's going to kill him, and then God sends an angel to say to Abraham, stop, don't do that, you can sacrifice a deer that was there in that same moment. And, there's a lot of interpretation what that story is trying to tell us. And, the regular interpretation is that one interpretation is that this story was inserted into the Bible because they wanted to show that the Jewish people are different because all the pagans in that area at that time were doing human sacrifice. And of course, one story is about a story that God wanted to test Abraham's faith. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying to myself, why? Abraham is the most obedient follower. He did everything God asked him. Why did he need to test him? And I think that it was a test, but it was the other way around. Because I think God wanted Abraham to stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do that. That's just wrong. God told Abraham to take Isaac and sacrifice him. But to stop him, he sent an angel. Why? Because he was disappointed. He didn't even want to see him. More than that, the Bible talks about, after that incident, Abraham lives for 40 more years. God doesn't talk to him even once in all those years that he keeps on living. And in all the Bible, in all the stories that you have after that, you never have a relationship with anybody the way God had with Abraham. He doesn't create a personal relationship because I think he was a little disappointed. And this is it. The Bible is trying to tell us if you see something is wrong, you should stand up for your belief and for what you think is right, because this is the meaning of being in the likeness of God. Second story. We skip a generation, because I don't have a lot of time, to Abraham's grandson, Jacob. And Jacob, this story, he just ran away from his house. He's about 20 years old. And he just stole a blessing from his father that was supposed to go to his brother. And he's afraid that his brother is going to kill him. And he lies down in the wilderness, goes to sleep, and God comes to him in a dream. And in that dream, God basically promises him very good stuff. He tells him, I'm going to make a big nation out of you. I'm going to be with you wherever you go, whatever you do. And that seems like a great, offer. If I would have dreamed that dream, I would wake up and I'd say, okay, that sounds like fun. But Abraham, I call him the first Jewish lawyer, because he looks at this offer and doesn't say, I don't like the guarantees here. I need better promises here, right?